Everything happening in the Middle East today, the sanctions, the nuclear program, the decades of hostility, can be traced back to one secret operation in 1953. An operation so controversial that for decades it was officially denied. Most Americans don't even know it happened. But inside Iran, its consequences still shape politics, anger, and mistrust to this day. This is the story of the CIA coup that changed the Middle East. In the early 1950s, Iran was not yet the geopolitical battlefield we recognize today. Instead, it was a young democracy trying to take control of its future. At the center of that movement was Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh was not a radical revolutionary. He was an aristocrat educated in Europe, a constitutionalist who believed in democracy and national sovereignty. But he had one idea that terrified Western powers. He wanted Iran to control its own oil. At the time, Iran's oil industry was dominated by the British-owned Anglo-Iranian oil company, the corporation that would later become BP. Britain controlled the profits, the infrastructure, and most importantly, the pricing. Iran received only a small fraction of the massive wealth generated from its own resources. To Mossadegh, this was national humiliation. So, in 1951, he nationalized Iran's oil industry. For Iranians, it was a moment of pride. Britain immediately retaliated. They imposed a global boycott on Iranian oil and pushed the country into economic crisis. But sanctions alone were not enough. Behind closed doors, British intelligence began planning something far more extreme, removing Mossadegh from power entirely. There was just one problem. Britain no longer had the power to do it alone. So they turned to a new rising superpower, the United States. At first, the Americans were hesitant. President Harry Truman was skeptical about overthrowing a democratically elected leader. But when Dwight Eisenhower entered the White House in 1953, the calculation changed. The Cold War was intensifying. Washington feared that if Iran became unstable, it might fall into Soviet influence. So the CIA agreed to help. The operation was given a name: Operation Ajax. For Britain, it was economic warfare. The plan was not a traditional military invasion. Instead, it relied on manipulation, propaganda, and controlled chaos. CIA agents began secretly funding Iranian newspapers to publish anti-Mossadegh stories. Religious leaders were paid to denounce him. Street gangs were hired to stage riots and protests. The goal was simple: create the illusion that the country was collapsing. At first, the plan failed. Mossadegh remained popular, and the Shah, Iran's monarch, fled the country out of fear. But the CIA doubled down. More money flowed into the streets. More demonstrations were organized. Eventually, pro-Shah military units moved in. On August 19, 1953, Mossadegh's government was overthrown. The Shah returned to power, this time with far stronger authority. And the United States had just carried out one of the first covert regime change operations in modern history. For the next 26 years, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah was a strong ally of the United States and Britain. Western oil companies regained access to Iranian resources, and Iran became a key strategic partner during the Cold War. But inside the country, the situation was very different. The Shah ruled as an authoritarian monarch. His secret police, known as SAVAK, were trained with assistance from Western intelligence. Political opposition was crushed, and dissidents were imprisoned. To many Iranians, their democracy had been stolen, and the power responsible for that theft was the United States. For decades, resentment quietly built beneath the surface. Then, in 1979, it exploded. A massive revolution forced the Shah to flee Iran permanently. In his place rose a new government led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The revolution was not just about overthrowing the Shah. It was about rejecting foreign control. Soon after, Iranian students stormed the US Embassy in Tehran and took American diplomats hostage for 444 days. From that moment on, the relationship between Iran and the United States became openly hostile. When Americans look at modern tensions with Iran, the nuclear standoff, the sanctions, many see them as recent developments. But inside Iran, the memory of 1953 is still alive. It represents proof that foreign powers will intervene whenever their interests are threatened. In other words, the distrust did not begin with the revolution, it began with the coup, a secret operation that reshaped an entire region. History is often presented as a series of isolated events, but sometimes a single decision echoes across generations. In 1953, a covert CIA operation removed a democratically elected leader and replaced him with a dictatorship. Decades later, the consequences are still unfolding. The conflicts dominating the Middle East today did not appear overnight. They began in a quiet operation room, and the world is still living with the result.